The Wasteland was a merciless beast, and hunger was its cruelest weapon. We had been walking for hours under a sun that felt like it was trying to peel the skin from our bones. The air was dry, each breath scraping my throat like sandpaper. My stomach growled, loud enough that Samuels glanced at me with a wry grin. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. 2 days, I muttered. Maybe 3. You? Same, he admitted. We're running on fumes. Behind us, Maria and Davis trudged silently, their faces pale and sunken. None of us had the energy to talk. The last of our rations had been split between us the night before, and the small handful of dried meat and stale crackers hadn't gone far. The wasteland stretched out endlessly, a barren expanse of cracked earth and skeletal trees. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was pulling us down, trying to swallow us whole. I scanned the horizon, searching for anything, a ruined building, a cluster of trees, a hint of shade, anything that might offer a reprieve. And then we saw him. The man appeared as if conjured by a mirage. He was standing by the remnants of a rusted-out truck, waving one hand above his head while the other rested on a makeshift spear. He was lean but not gaunt, his clothes patched but clean. Most striking of all was the small fire beside him, a tin pot balanced on a metal grate, steam curling up into the air. The smell of something cooking hit me like a punch to the gut. "Think he's friendly?" Maria asked, her voice hoarse. "Does it matter?" Davis grunted. "If he's got food, we need to find out." I tightened my grip on my rifle. "Stay back. Let me talk to him first." As I approached, the man smiled, his face splitting into an expression that was almost too warm for a place like this. "Hey there, traveler," he called out. "You look like you could use a bite." I stopped a few paces away, my finger hovering near the trigger. "Who are you?" He raised his hands, palms out. "Name's Ellis. Just another poor soul trying to scrape by. You and your group look like you've had it rough." "What's in the pot?" I asked, my eyes darting to the fire. "Rabbit stew," he said, almost proudly. "Caught 'em myself. Couple of fat ones, too. Figured I'd make enough to share if anyone wandered by." "And you're just giving it away?" Ellis chuckled. "Not much use hoarding kindness in a place like this. Besides, it's better to have friends than enemies out here, don't you think?" Behind me, I heard Maria's stomach growl loudly, followed by Davis muttering a curse under his breath. I glanced back at them, their gaunt faces filled with a mixture of desperation and hope. "You don't trust me," Ellis said, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. "I get it. But you're welcome to take a look at the pot. See for yourself." I stepped closer, the smell of the stew overwhelming. It was rich and savory, the kind of smell that made your mouth water even if you weren't starving. Chunks of meat floated in a thick broth, along with what looked like wild onions and some kind of root vegetable. "Where'd you catch the rabbits?" I asked, my voice low. He gestured vaguely behind him. "There's a little stream about a mile back that way. They come down to drink. Easy pickings if you've got traps." "Sonny," Maria called, her voice trembling. "We need to eat." I hesitated, the rifle still heavy in my hands. Something about Ellis felt off, but maybe that was just the paranoia that came with living out here. I glanced at Samuels, who gave me a small nod. "All right," I said finally. "But I'm watching you." Ellis smiled again, stepping back to give us space. "Take your time. I've got nothing to hide." As the others shuffled forward, drawn by the promise of food, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. The stew smelled too good. Ellis was too friendly, and in the wasteland, nothing was ever free. The air in Ellis's makeshift camp felt heavier than it should have, as though the smoke from his fire carried an unseen weight. Maria and Davis hunched over bowls of stew, shoveling the food into their mouths with a desperation that made me wince. Samuels ate slower, his eyes darting between Ellis and me. But even he couldn't resist the pull of hunger. I sat apart, watching, my fingers drumming nervously against my rifle. "You not hungry?" Ellis asked, his smile warm but his eyes cold. The way he sat, relaxed but deliberate, his hands never straying far from his spear, put me on edge. "I'll eat later," I lied. My stomach churned, torn between the gnawing hunger and the distrust that clawed at the edges of my mind. "Suit yourself," he said with a shrug. "You'll regret it, though. Can't survive out here on suspicion alone." Maria let out a soft sigh, leaning back against a chunk of rusted metal. "It's been so long since I've had something warm," she murmured, her voice almost dreamy. "Feels like I'm human again." "Good, right?" Ellis said, his grin widening. "Told you, nothing to worry about." Davis's bowl clattered to the ground as he doubled over, clutching his stomach. "Ah, hell," he groaned, sweat beading on his forehead. "I think I ate too fast." "Davis?" Maria leaned toward him, her face pale. "Probably just the food hitting too quick," Ellis said casually, stirring the pot. "Your stomach's not used to it. Give it a minute." But it wasn't just Davis. Maria's breathing grew shallow, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her abdomen. "Sonny," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something's wrong." I was on my feet in an instant, my rifle trained on Ellis. "What the hell did you put in that stew?" He held up his hands, his face a mask of mock innocence. "Nothing bad, I swear. It's just rabbit and roots." Samuels dropped his bowl, staggering back as his skin flushed an unnatural shade of red. "Sonny, I don't feel right." Ellis rose slowly, his spear in hand. "Don't go pointing fingers at me. Maybe it's something you brought with you. The Wasteland's full of nasty surprises, you know." Maria let out a strangled cry, collapsing to the ground. Her body convulsed, her fingers clawing at her throat as if trying to pull something out. Davis wasn't far behind, his screams cutting through the night as his limbs twisted at unnatural angles. "Help! Them!" Samuels gasped, but his words slurred, his knees buckling. I backed away, my heart pounding as Maria's skin began to shift, her veins bulging beneath the surface like writhing worms. Her eyes, once glassy with exhaustion, now glowed with a sickly yellow hue. She let out a guttural snarl, her teeth elongating into jagged points. "What's happening?" Samuels rasped, clawing at his own arms as his flesh blistered and peeled. His voice cracked, becoming deeper, almost inhuman. Ellis took a step back, his grin gone. "Damn," he muttered, his tone flat. "Didn't think it'd take hold this quick." "You knew," I growled, my rifle steady despite the panic coursing through me. "What did you feed them?" He didn't answer, instead shifting his grip on the spear. "You've got bigger problems, friend." Maria lunged at me, her movements jerky but horrifyingly fast. I fired without thinking, the shot tearing through her chest. She stumbled, blood spraying from the wound, but it wasn't enough to stop her. Her mouth opened wide, a guttural roar erupting as she charged again. I fired again, this time hitting her square between the eyes. She crumpled to the ground, twitching violently before finally going still. "Sonny, behind you," Samuels shouted, his voice distorted. I spun just in time to see Davis, his body grotesquely misshapen, barreling toward me. His arms had elongated, the bones jutting out at sickening angles, and his mouth was a mass of sharp, snapping teeth. I sidestepped, slamming the butt of my rifle into his head. He reeled but didn't fall, his claws swiping inches from my face. Ellis took the opportunity to bolt, disappearing into the shadows with a muttered curse. I wanted to chase him, but there was no time. Davis lunged again, and I pulled the trigger, the bullet ripping through his skull. He collapsed, spasming before going silent. I turned to Samuels, who was leaning heavily against a rusted pipe. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow, but he hadn't fully turned. "Stay with me," I said, my voice firm. "We're getting out of here." The twisted bodies of our former companions lay in the flickering firelight as I dragged Samuels away from the camp. The night swallowed us, the wasteland offering no answers and no mercy. The wasteland's night was a relentless black, broken only by the faint glow of the campfire still flickering behind us. Samuels leaned heavily on me, his breath ragged and labored. Each step felt like dragging a corpse, but I wasn't ready to give up on him. Not yet. You need to leave me," Samuels gasped, his voice weak but resolute. "I'm slowing you down." "Shut up," I snapped, shifting my grip to keep him upright. "You're not dying out here." The ground beneath us was uneven, littered with rocks and patches of desiccated plants. Every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind carrying whispers that made my skin crawl. I kept my rifle ready, scanning the horizon for signs of Ellis or worse, something that had once been human. "Sonny," Samuels rasped, his voice barely audible. I don't feel right." I stopped, turning to face him. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the moonlight. Veins stood out like dark rivers, and his pupils were blown wide. He trembled in my arms, his body convulsing in small, sporadic jerks. "Stay with me," I said, my tone firm. "You're not turning. You hear me? You're not." A low growl cut through the stillness, freezing the words in my throat. It wasn't human, and it wasn't far off either. I turned slowly, my heart pounding as the sound grew louder, closer. The creature emerged from the shadows, its shape grotesque and wrong. It had once been Ellis, but his humanity was gone. His limbs were elongated, the skin stretched taut over his bones. His jaw hung at an unnatural angle, revealing rows of jagged, mismatched teeth. And his eyes burned with a sickly yellow light, void of anything human. "Ellis," I said, my voice low, "you've really gone and done it now." He tilted his head, the movement jerky, almost curious. Then he charged. I shoved Samuels behind a cluster of rocks and raised my rifle, firing 3 quick shots. 2 hit their mark, tearing into Ellis's chest, but they didn't slow him. He lunged, claws outstretched, and I barely had time to throw myself to the side. His momentum carried him past me, but he spun with a feral grace, his movements unnervingly fast. "Sonny," Samuels croaked from behind the rocks. "Stay down," I barked, circling Ellis. My hands were steady, my breathing controlled, but inside, panic clawed at the edges of my mind. I aimed for his head and fired again. The bullet ripped through his skull, splattering dark ichor across the ground. He collapsed, twitching violently before going still. I didn't wait to see if he'd stay down. Grabbing Samuels, I hauled him to his feet. "We're moving, now." We stumbled through the wasteland, the horizon a bleak, unchanging expanse. Samuels grew weaker with each step, his weight dragging me down. My legs screamed in protest, but I kept going. Stopping wasn't an option. When the wall finally came into view, it was like seeing salvation itself. The massive gates loomed ahead, guarded by watchtowers and spotlights that cut through the darkness. I stumbled toward it, shouting hoarsely, "Open up! It's Sonny!" The gates creaked open just enough to let us through. A pair of guards rushed forward, taking Samuels from my arms as I collapsed to my knees, gasping for breath. "What the hell happened out there?" one of them asked, his voice sharp. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pushed myself to my feet, grabbed a piece of chalk from a nearby crate, and walked to the wall. My hand shook as I scrawled the words, each letter etched with grim finality. Rule 14. Don't eat anything you didn't hunt.